Thank you everyone so much for your patience. Again, we really appreciate it.
Mhm.
People coming in from many different time zones, and it's been quite the acrobatics even just to plan out where we all are in the world. And so I'm very grateful for this technology that does allow us to connect across so many different continents, and so many different backgrounds and disciplines. And we are very excited to welcome our next speaker into the space. I have brought up Annalise Hordern here as my co-host, and she's actually going to be welcoming one of her mentors onto the stage. So Annalise, I will let you introduce her.
Oh, thank you so much, Genevieve. Wow, what an incredible morning we've had. Thank you everyone for hanging tight with us. So Rosemary Morrow, Permaculture for Refugees, Moving from Crisis is Rose's theme. Rosemary has worked for nearly 40 years in precarious places in the world, many in civil war places, also in war zones, and more recently in refugee camps. Ro, you touch so many of us in the world, and you're helping the people of greatest need, including those people of the wealthy, because they're of greatest need too. Thank you so much for joining us, and we really welcome you to the Symbiosis Symposium.
Thank you so much. Well, it's 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning here in the Blue Mountains in Australia. We're heading in for summer. It's a quiet morning. We have a little bit of wind and the garden's thriving. So I live on Gundungurra land. This is Aboriginal land that was never ceded in probably maybe the world's biggest land grab, given that Captain Cook took a whole continent. I think it's a privilege and a pleasure to live on this land. So I'm in the heart of one of the world national parks, 1 million hectares of untouched land that was never been cut in time, and it's a marvellous place to be. So that's where I spend some of my life. I'd like to start with thanks to Genevieve and to Ali Ma, Annalise, I've known, and the people who organised this. And it's lovely to be speaking to so many people across the world. I wonder you didn't get mixed up in time zones, because I did. Anyway, so coming back to my topic, I'd like to thank the previous speakers and the welcome from a New Zealander, and Aotearoa, New Zealand. Thank you. This morning, well, I guess it's not your morning, but today I'd like to talk to you about my work and why I hope it'll be transformative. So there are two things. A few years ago in 2015, a small group of us, a very small group of 5, decided we should take permaculture to refugee camps and settlements. And why would we do this? I think there are 2 reasons. Permaculture has been mainly middle class and European, with quite a lot of African work and Indian work, but principally it's for Europeans, European type societies or Westerners. And it needs to work on the edges and the margins where there's the greatest suffering and least resources. And if it can't, then it needs to be said this is a nice middle class study and practice. If it cannot reach and it cannot transform the lives of everyone, really, not just some people, because we claim it's global. The other thing is a deep conviction of mine that you have a right to know what is happening politically in your life. We have a right to know about climate change. We have a right to know about contagion of diseases. We have a right to know what's going to happen in our lives, because then we can start to act. We can get proactive. We can put things in place that are going to make lives easier. So what we have is my conviction it's people's right to know permaculture so they can take the action they want to take in their societies to rebuild or build in resilience. So these were my inspirations, that it was just an unfair thing to work only in the one group or people. So 40 years ago, I went to Vietnam. There were 37 cars and no public telephones, and you delivered a letter by giving it to someone who rode a bicycle somewhere. Transformation's been immense. But permaculture had quite a big input at that stage on re-establishing food supplies. So there are several things. As you know, 16th of October was World Food Day, and the right to food and quality food is also one of my deep beliefs, and it ties into an understanding of plants. So rather than digress too much, I'd like to tell you what we did. We contacted people across the world in different continents and different cultures, ages and religions, who were running camp programs for refugees. So that took us to Bangladesh in Southeast Asia, and the Philippines, and Malaysia, and the Middle East, and Greece. A pretty big scope, and that took 1.5 years. So I'd like to take you through that journey, and I've got some pictures for you. So Genevieve, I'd be really glad if you could bring in the first photo for me, please, if that's possible. Thank you. So this morning it's a little invitation to come and visit with us. Permaculture for refugees, because refugees and prisoners are probably the groups least voices, most silent, and least able to access information. So let's have a look at the next one. Right, just like to show you a little bit of a refugee camp in Southeast Asia. This is where the medical team works, behind the broken fence, over the dirty water, and you can see how deeply the rubbish goes. These are the conditions we're working with. They are beyond slum conditions. They are debilitating, they're disease-causing, they're humiliating. And what we're looking at here is what happens with refugees. First of all, the water supplies collapse usually. Secondly, the plastic goes up. And with these two things, you get other problems, such as diseases, you get conflicts, you get people coming, this will fix or that will fix. Essentially, a situation as in Bangladesh, where 1 million people arrived in a few weeks after the brutal government in Myanmar expelled them, and someone had to find food, water, clothing, housing for 1 million people. A huge job, and I think UN did pretty well, but I think they can do better. So what they do is bring everything in plastic because it's apparently hygienic, and the response is that you get meters and sometimes mountains, as in Iraq, of plastic. Water supplies are all polluted. So let's go on a bit. And this is not the refugees' fault. Okay. So the other thing is the drain on the local community. This is a truck, and these trucks went all day bringing in bamboo. I'm asking you, where do you think it came from? It had to come from another place in Bangladesh where they needed the bamboo, because most of the housing's in bamboo. So it's unloaded onto a rice field, a former rice field, which is no longer growing rice, and everyone cuts it into strips, and it's woven into modular houses. And then the refugees come, and they pick up a wall and carry it away, and then that wall then gets made into a house, and they come back and they weave another wall and they take it away, and it's a whole village of woven walls. So this is a very good thing, except like the sand that's used for concrete, it is actually reducing a resource that the people need. Cement is a big, big factor. Concreta, grey, is used all the way through, and the sand is taken from the rivers collapse, the rice paddies collapse. People need to keep warm, they need to cook a fire, cook their rice, so therefore they cut the trees, and then the local people are upset. It is a big issue of compounding disasters. It doesn't have to be. Let's have a look next. Thank you. So this is a classroom. I don't know how clear it is for you, but one of the problems everywhere with the refugee camps is the classrooms. So this camp had 50,000 people, and we were working with representatives from a small neighbourhood of 2,000. So an invitation sent out to that local group, and they're asked if they want to come and do permaculture. And really, we don't know why they come, because they don't know what it is. They probably think it's food supplies, or I'm not sure. They know what computers are and they know what English is, but they don't know what this is. Camp 51, sorry. Camp 19 was in another country. So they put an orange tarpaulin on the floor and build one on the roof and get a whiteboard, and there's your classroom. And then all the villagers walk around and the chickens walk through and someone leads a duck through, and halfway through you have to all stand up and move when they're carrying through a concrete toilet or a piece of cement that's going to make the base for a water tank, and then we all regroup. When it rains, we all go to the middle not to get wet, and then we wipe it all down and start again. So we use a local host here who does the organising. It's very difficult, usually with camp management, but we manage. I'd like you to think how many refugees you know and what your image of a refugee is. Because as you can see here today, they're men and women, they're young and old. Well, you will see some more. Some bring their children, some are illiterate, some are professors. The Syrians, you know, professors of French, professors of languages, business owners, a very, very diverse group. So that's our classroom, and next to me is an interpreter, and that's one of the challenges. So let's go on. Right, can you come with me to Turkey? Now we're in a little village in Turkey, which is the nearest jumping off place to officially Greece, which is the European Common Union, the European Community. So many, many people come here. So Bangladesh has 1 million refugees. Turkey has 5 million. 5 million, and once they get there, if possible, the men leave to get work, and 80% are women and children. So we decided we wanted to have a women's class because women needed to hold the knowledge and they could do things. This nice looking room is actually a polyhouse that had plants in it. You'd recognise that perhaps. We had a coal fire, the wind blew. We had 3 different interpreters. We had the Turkish language, we had Arabic language, we had Farsi as well, and we had English. We had some English volunteers working in that community in Chesme, and the women were enchanted with what they were learning, and they loved it. And there was a very young ones of 14, 15, and older women of 50. So age is no barrier. Okay, we'll have a look at the next one. I'd like you to get a picture of where we're working. It was cold. Yeah. Now, here's a classroom. My goodness, this was the worst venue of the lot. This is Francie. She's an Italian permaculturalist who was able to come and join us in Greece. This is on Lesbos. Do you know about Lesbos? First of all, the fire burnt down this centre where you can see us. Then there was another fire that burnt down the whole camp, and now 12,000 people are homeless, walking around the island. Now see the man over there with his legs crossed and the pink trousers? Okay, so that's Costa. Costa is a human rights lawyer for children. He was often missing as he would go to court to try to get children protected in the camp. But he has opened his house and land with the homelessness of refugees now to many of the people who need it, and he's developing a big permaculture centre in addition to his work. So one of the critical things was to include local people because it builds relationship. This is why I'm saying, what refugees do you know and what refugees are you talking to? Because once you know refugees, they're not a refugee anymore. They're a man, a woman, a child, a person with a sense of humour, highly motivated and very generous. Once you get to Greece, you've got a huge range of people. You'll see some Africans at the back, pushed out of the Congo and Sudan. As you know, those wars have been dreadful, and they have crossed it. There's a man in that group who spent 2 years in prison in Turkey and was tortured, and they come to class and they're as bright and cheerful as you are. Can you just think for yourself, just for a minute, please? What's your image of a refugee when you see this? What is your feeling about refugees as we look at the Rohingya, and then we look at the Syrian women, and now we look at a mixed group with about 5 different languages? This is a little workshop that fixes things, and they help people to mend and repair anything they've got, from shoes to clothes to anything, but badly crowded. We try to maintain a circle. We don't usually stand up in front. This is a briefing, and then we get people into groups to work. So we would use the local people and the local organisation and the refugees, all in mixed groups, to work together to solve the problems of design for a camp and living in a camp. Because our objective is to transform refugee camps. And this is particularly important, as you will find out, partly because there are going to be so many more refugees in the world, but also because crowded living will be big as well. So let's go on. There are some venues. There are many others. I was just going to show you this one. In Lavrio, it was a really difficult camp. There was a group family in the camp that was terrifying all the other refugees and breaking and destroying everything. So we're in a room with the walls painted black. We couldn't go out. The children would throw stones and rocks and couldn't be controlled. The windows were barred. I won't go on. But here, everyone's got a soil sample, and I like to be lower than the students, so I generally sit on the floor. Some of you know. We've got the woman who's standing behind over there on the left. She's the Arabic translator. Then we had a Dari translator. The woman with the glasses and her back to us, she's the French translator. And I think we had another translator. And the result is chaos. Are you teaching the translators? Are you teaching the students? What happens when someone has a question? Can the whole class get it? It's pretty dramatic work, but somehow we think messages get through. So let's go on. Thank you, Genevieve. This is one where we're packed into a greenhouse. This wasn't bad, except the roof blew off at one stage. It was very cold, and that's since been burnt down. And that was the only place they could find us for 30 people for a classroom. It was pretty awful. Okay, let's go on again. Right, now here's something really important. We had to change our teaching completely. So this was a massive transformation. So the whole chalk and talk and sage on the stage had to go. Just think about it. You're the teacher, and there are 4 different language groups, and even the translators don't have English as their original language, and others don't speak the original language of the translator, which might be, say, Turkish, but no one in a group in that Turkish, in the Syrian group spoke Turkish, so we spoke English and Dari and Farsi. All very difficult. We found that where people were literate, we had to grab someone and get it translated the night before. So the night before we had to work to get posters translated, pictures drawn, materials developed so we could teach with minimum inputs in language. And you'd forget. Can you imagine? You just forget. You'd say, okay, everyone, let's go outside now. And everyone stare at you blankly, like, what's she saying? So we had to be very careful, and we had to develop materials, we'd use a pencil to show this is a good thing for holding up a roof. We'd use a block like this to say you can put the house here above the floodwaters. We would use anything we could that was grabbable, insight, or, oh, let's use this to show some mountains, and we would develop whatever we had, we were using to teach, and it was really a moment-by-moment discovery to give voice to the translation, and we were never sure if the translator was right or accurate because they didn't know permaculture, and we weren't always sure about the English, and they weren't always there for debriefings. So, okay, let's have a look at the next one. Now, what we found were fabulous. We're using a comprehensive poster. So we'd put lots of things in about food and restoring the environment and how it could be done in a camp. And then we'd get people to get up and put stickers in this case, English for interpreters, but then we'd get people to write them in language, and we'd get everyone up and doing as much as possible. So we had to use the visuals maximally, and we ended up using a lot of role plays. So let's go on. Okay, so one of the ethics of permaculture. You can care for people, but not have to take care of them. We talk about care of people in permaculture, which is setting the conditions under which people can thrive. And in this case, it's most important at this stage to work with food and water and shelter and safety than it actually is to deal with trauma. And when people are in camps, they all have their stories, horrific stories, stories that when you come home you toss and turn at night because it's too terrible. But one of the things about that is care of people gives them the impetus and the motivation to get going, to create better conditions. And with that comes some sort of release. Two things happen to people, and they're happening in camps. And they're happening to people, I think, all over the world with COVID-19. One is uncertainty. What's going to happen? Will I get my job back? Will I get sick? What happens if I go here? And how to deal with those risks of uncertainty. And that is having, in Australia, big psychological effects. There's a lot of depression, a lot of mental illness because of uncertainty. And people sometimes think it's themselves. We try to give people certainty for the moment that they're there, the moment that they can put something in the ground and care for it, the moment they can share their knowledge. We're building on a series of activities. The other thing that makes people really distressed is you're not allowed to do much. So if you're a farmer or a nurse or a gardener or a doctor or a teacher or a train driver, that is taken from you. And that is also a COVID response to lockup, is that your reason for being socially engaged, for being involved, is ripped away from you, and you just sit, in this case, in a tent or a container, and you don't know what will happen next. People don't understand you, the authorities are too busy, you have no control over your life, you're given food every Thursday on a food voucher, and then otherwise there's not much to do. It's particularly hard on men who have wrapped up their lives in their futures, but equally hard on women. So care of people, we work through it a bit on what we can do and how we can do it, but it isn't so much trauma counselling, because unless I've been through the experience of living in a camp, and unless the trauma is relieved, I don't think I can say, but I can create all sorts of other things that make people feel motivated and happier for where they are. And permaculture is very good. So let's continue a bit. Right, this is a role play. And this is women being different sorts of windbreaks. And you can see they're smiling and laughing. And the main report was next day, we feel as if we're not refugees. We feel as if we're real people. We didn't know each other well because people work in groups a whole lot. And you can see there's another couple of posters on the wall. We stick everything up so it stays there and people can read it in their own time. I'll go on a little bit because the important things about this are the way we're teaching and what we're doing is creating a whole lot of experience for a changing world. So these teaching methods were pretty dramatic and improvised by the moment. The woman sitting in the chair with glasses, she was a Macedonian who spoke Greek, but also spoke Turkish and English. Yeah, and I think she spoke Arabic. So you can see what was happening and how difficult it would be, I hope. Okay, let's go on. It was also fun. So as much as possible, we did practical work. So this is a group of refugees in Bangladesh, and we're showing them how to manage water. Now, the camp in Bangladesh is up and over hills like this, that all the trees have gone, and dozens and millions of houses are placed cheek by jowl in tents and bamboo, and the water is filthy, and there's no sewerage, and it runs like green slime down the streets. So what we want to do is to help people get control of the water in the camp, because it's the camp's transformation we're interested in more than whether they take the work home. In this case, the refugees will probably never go home. The Myanmar military has burnt all their houses, burnt their villages, and given the land to someone else. If ever in the future we knew who had it, it's because aerial surveys have been taken now before it's completely obliterated. So see what happens here? We put 3 rows, we grab some bamboo, a bit of string and a hoe, and we start taking a slope where we are. Then we'll get water and fill it, and we'll see how we hold water. Then they can see how to manage the grey water, slow it down, fill it with water plants, and they'll be able to clean it by the time it gets to the bottom of the hill. In this case, we had a little refugee house, and we transformed that as well. Okay, let's go on. We're back to that. I don't know how that photo is there. But, okay. So the other thing is, how are we doing in these courses? Are people learning things, and is it useful? With all the languages, and many people are illiterate. Not many, no. Maybe a small percentage are illiterate. We had to have fairly simple ways of doing evaluations. We could do fingers, what's best? 5 out of 10, 8 out of 10, 2 out of 10, didn't like it at all, loved it, which we did regularly and gave people who hadn't spoken an opportunity to express themselves. But also we found this one very good. We just draw a circle, divide it into 6, 1 meals, 1 the time, 1 the content, another for the process of the teaching, the teacher and the admin, and we would leave the room and everyone would put a coloured mark. So the things they didn't like were on the edge, and you can see some of the food wasn't that good. Some of them didn't like the time at all. What they did like, the administration was good, the content was good, the teachers were good, the processes, were pretty good. So it gave us a quick picture of what people thought of the course. Okay. And those sorts of techniques are needed because you can't always know that what the interpreter's saying is right. So you have to have something that's immediate and from the student to you. Okay, let's go on. Thank you. This was just the refugee women again, and you can see an entirely different environment. What was really important is that they said they were going to take this back to Syria and rebuild Syria, and that if they'd known it before they left, they would have had better food and not so much drought. So the important thing about what we're doing is people can carry it in their memories. They don't even need tools because the tools are nearly everywhere. So they could just go ahead and use that information if and when they go home. Actually, it's looking unlikely for some of these Syrians to be able to go home, but maybe they can. Okay, let's go. Thank you, Genevieve. Now, this was a camp that was so difficult. It was difficult because no one would come till 10 in the morning and we wanted to start at night. It was difficult because the translators came late. It was difficult because the women were quite separated out very often. So we did some gardens. This was an old holiday camp in Greece that had been given over as an emergency to refugees, not your usual crowded one. But we got some soil and we made mulch and we made compost, and we just designed gardens for every little house individually. They designed their own garden and we made two, and the other people in the camp just destroyed them, utterly wrecked them. And so we would come back next morning and all the materials were destroyed, all the plants were gone and the gardens were wrecked. So this woman standing on your left is Fotini, who comes from Mediterranean Permaculture. She's doing brilliant work. And she went back and she found the people and invited them to a meeting who'd been doing the damage. And then we got some budget and we provided all the people who'd been providing the damage, but they hadn't wanted to come to the class, and controlling the camp with materials to make their own gardens. So 3 months later, every little house had gardens. That was the most extraordinary thing, that making friends and reducing that conflict was done so brilliantly. And since then, the Danish Refugee Council, which ran that course and invited us in, they've invited Fotini to teach in, I think, 3 or 4 other camps. So the whole thing is spreading. Now, some of those young men you see will be invited, and the women will be invited as teachers for other refugees. So we'd like to have refugees teaching refugees. Now, remember, there are 50 million refugees in the world, 25 million in camps living in horror situations, and 5 or 6 people think we can turn it round, which is ridiculous, but we're going to try. Let's go on. Okay, now this was entirely different. This was a woman at a university in Kuala Lumpur, and she was running the Sustainable Development Goals program for the university, which is really strange. She found all these refugees living in Kuala Lumpur, and most of them are from Myanmar, but they're ethnic. So Rohingya are one ethnicity. These are Mon and Chan. We had 3 14-year-olds, 1 girl and 2 boys. They're all teaching in local schools because in Malaysia, refugees can't go to school. I think this is all transformative, isn't it? And so all these young people are running schools and literacy programs for younger people than themselves. At the end of each day, there was a young fella, Tony. His name isn't Tony, but I'd say to him, "What are you doing, Tony?" He'd say, "I'm making up a lesson that I'm going to teach my kids in my Chan school next week when we go back." So at the end of every day, when we'd be learning, he'd write it up for the primary school children he was teaching. Now, this garden belongs to the guest house, and it's absolutely transformed. And all the people who see it will know it's been done by refugees. As a result of this project, they've made a video, and in times of COVID in Malaysia, they're taking it and showing it on sheets in various camps and settlements. They're doing it in language for the Chan and the Mon people, so they're getting it in their language. They're doing posters, and they're out there teaching. And 2 people have been put on the SDG staff to work with the refugee project. So it's really pushing ahead, and it's run by Narani and Nurul there, and it's just fantastic. It's as fantastic as Fotini. And I forgot to tell you, remember seeing the Bangladesh people making the contours? Well, since then, each one of those people went out and taught 25 more, and they taught, and at the end of 6 weeks, 2,500 refugees in that neighbourhood had converted the neighbourhood. Okay, let's go on. Now, Costas is the person I told you about, who is the human rights Greek lawyer, and he invited all the refugees to come and stay and develop his farm who were in the course. For people who'd been a couple of years in refugee camps, to go to someone's home, to be on farmland, was one of the biggest gifts. So building in the local people has become a critical part of this, because they all like each other. Aren't they gorgeous? Goodness, they're a lovely group. I'm missing them. Okay, let's go on. Thank you. As soon as we can, we get students teaching students. So the moment someone's drawn a design, we get them to stand up in their own language and speak to the group, so that over a day we listen to Farsi, we listen to Arabic, we listen to Greek, we listen to all the others. The people who were the most upset at this stage were the Yemeni, and that was the most frequent breakdown of society and refugees to come through. But getting students to teach each other. As soon as we know that they're sure, we say, please come and explain this to the class. Okay, let's go on. We had to use any space we can. One of the things we do is put people into groups, preferably mixed language groups, because there's often conflict, and we get them to work together on a design for the whole camp. So they do their own place, but then we give them a big sheet of paper and say, now do a design for the camp. And everyone in that classroom does the same area. And at the end, the designs are put up and everyone looks at everyone else's work. These are actually tools for building conflict resolution, for diminishing violence, for enabling people to understand another group. Perhaps the Palestinians don't like the Afghans, or the Syrians don't like the Yemen. I don't know, I'm just making this up. But what we are able to do is mix the groups up. At the end of working together, they all like each other. Okay, so we'll go on. Thank you, Genevieve. Right, here we are. This is a mixed group of Yemeni and Afghanis, and they're all working. We only had brown paper here, and we're working in a yoga room. This is our 8th classroom that we had to move around, which is a nuisance. Okay, I think we'll just go on to the next one, please. The outcomes were terrific. When they started, people kept drawing home, and we'd say, don't draw home, which was Syria or Afghanistan or Yemen. Please draw where you are now, and we get them to do that. So let's go on. Now, this is what happens when people draw a food garden. You can see, I'm sorry if food isn't your interest, but we get people design intensive, mixed gardens of great diversity and high yielding. So this is a case of having learned how to do that and how people start putting in aubergine, bitter gourd. You can see there's corn, there's tomatoes, there's lettuces, there are fruit trees, there are timber trees, there's probably 15 or 16 different things there. And then we had to teach them how to grow these in a camp. So we'd collect the plastic bottles, we'd collect plastic bags, we'd collect rice bags, we'd collect old tins, old shoes, fill them with soil, put a seed in and let it grow. So we would use a bit of bamboo for a ladder to grow a pumpkin. We would grow on the roof. We would grow on the windowsill. We'd grow in front of the doors to put down desks. And we suddenly started turning it all into small-scale intensive, what had been extensive. And that was a huge change in teaching with special relevance. Okay, let's go. I'm watching the time too. Okay, so look at this group, all refugees, all suffered enormously, all been through the most horrific situations. And here they are in Malaysia, being active and dedicated students, but more than that, it's the way they want to work with their communities. So the 5 million refugees in Malaysia, they're able to go out and teach them with the knowledge. Let's go, please. Okay, this is the Lesbos group. What we've heard about them, some of them have moved on, some of them are doing more extraordinary things, some of them are in a terrible situation. We'll just go on a bit more. Okay, this man cried for the first 3 days. He was such a gifted, wonderful, insightful mind that once he clicked into learning, he became transformed with the power of what he could do and how he could do it. I think he could be also a nuclear physicist or a brain surgeon. I guess one of the things about being a refugee is it wastes human potential. And I always think we shouldn't waste any. But he just came through it at the end and he was brilliant. Let's keep going. Right, and we'll another one, 2 years in Turkey. Now he wants to go back to the Sudan, South Sudan when the war's ended and teach there. Let's go on. Don't you love they dress up to come to class? They get dressed up in their very, very best Turkish, Syrian dress. The one thing that was marvellous about this was their fathers and husbands were so supportive and marvellous. But the one thing about the Syrians that was difficult, every time I would say anything about a break, everyone would jump up, they'd raise their arms and they'd start to dance. And the hands would wave and the heads would turn. It was just like Turkish and Greek dancing. And everyone would form a circle and they'd occupy the space and they'd dance. They danced on a bus when we took them to a park to see trees, because there are no trees here in Kurdistan in Iraq. And they were talking about forests and they said, what's a forest? And there are no forests in Kurdistan, not one. They've all been destroyed by war and drought. So we went to a park where there were 5 types of trees and they said, is this a forest? And I said, well, not really, but you can have a better one than this. And these were the young women who loved being it. Okay, let's go. Next one, please. Okay, this is a design for a whole Syrian camp. And you can see this is the older women. Some of them wore scarves, some didn't, some wore short skirts, they were just variety. This was a wonderful design. There were 10,000 people in this camp. They put in all grey water systems, shade systems, windbreaks, community gardens, women's areas. You could see that it was possible to transform a camp, and the design work could be done by the refugees themselves. And people often say, why don't you go and design camps? No, because the people can design their own. They know better what they're doing. They all lived in really containers with a little wall around them, but inside they had tiny courtyards. They'd grow a pumpkin, they'd grow a tomato, they would grow an aubergine, they'd recycle the grey water, and they're transforming the place in a mini and macro scale. And I get occasional emails from them. Nothing's changing, they're still there, so I'm hoping they could get some freedom. Anyway, let's go on. Is there one more, Genevieve? Have I finished?
I think that is actually the end of the slide. Thank you so much.
Did I run through the question time? It's because I started late and I couldn't work it out. If people want to send questions on later, I'm really interested.
You're actually in perfect timing. Thank you for being so mindful of the time. And we do have some questions that we would like to ask you. And I'm actually going to bring Annalise back on, and so she's going to ask these questions.
Thank you, Genevieve. That's lovely. That's gorgeous.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. I thank you deeply for the work that you do and your devotion and humility and strength and tenacity. Thank you so much.
Not really.
There it is. There's the humility. All right,
Can't hear you, Annalise.
If you can unmute, Annalise. Yeah.
Hello, and thank you so very, very much for sharing some more of your story. And I always find it tremendously, uplifting to see the different works that you're doing. And it really brings home what's happening around the planet, because we can be so just here in our world, but you really bring the world to us. So thank you so very much. We've been thinking a lot about, with the team, actually I'm just going to pull this out. We've been thinking a lot with the team about forest fires and about refugees that are in all sorts of parts of the world. And so can you help to share with us how you see permaculture can help refugees from forest fires and homes destroyed in Australia, America, Portugal, and really all around the world?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that question, because it had slipped my mind and you'd asked me earlier. Thank you, Annalie. So now, I was in Greece last year in the camp, and right near where we were, at the Lavrio camp, the one with the black walls, it was so difficult. They had been burnt out, and 240 people had died in the fires. And they were going to do a monument to where 37 people put the children in the middle on the beach, right on the Mediterranean, gathered around them, and the heat and the smoke killed everyone. It was a dreadful situation, and the fire had just gone through. At the same time, there was a group of permaculturists who said the culture we had there, which was homes in a pine forest, was really bad for us. So what we need is to transform to permaculture. And we started a project called the Phoenix Project, Rising from the Ashes. And they started to design so that on a permaculture design, they'd have houses that were resistant to fire or shelters, houses that had wetlands around them, so with grey water systems and green vegetable gardens, and then your softer trees such as the deciduous, moving out so the core of each household would be a wet and a protected centre. Now, in a raging fire, way beyond where it's blowing, people have to go. But if you can save it, and the ones that have been saved, because I'm talking to people in Malakuta who are all refugees, internally displaced people, IDPs, internally displaced people, they are starting to build back better than before by embracing some permaculture principles that will give them a damp centre. So instead of all the grey water being sent off to be recycled in sewage or something, they're saying let's keep reed beds and wetlands and things around the houses. Let's have our grey water going to our fruit trees so they're always sappy and green and leafy. So, that's against conventional wisdom, which you clear within 15 metres of the house and clear concrete. But the fact is that there are many interesting things coming out of permaculture as a design. One thing we know is that just any sort of netting puts out sparks, even a nylon netting. So much is coming out that's able to be incorporated. And now we have people specialists in disasters, such as Sarah, Green Relief in the Philippines, and for earthquakes, magma, floods, and war. We're working in a refugee camp there in the Philippines, 500,000 displaced people, and what they were doing was running permaculture through that settlement. So when they went back, each individual is armed with their own knowledge. So they can take it and implement it, but they're working to principles. Okay, now the other thing is Bangladesh does work on disasters, and they are brilliant on floods and rising seas. Okay, so I think it may not be perfect, but it would be utterly transformative to turn houses and gardens where people live from the highly explosive species to wet, sappy species, and use water locally and completely on site. That is fire, but there are other things for other disasters.
Absolutely. That's just one example of how we can really use permaculture in a really common sense kind of way, because that's really what it is. Genevieve, you also had another question about about fires in relation to refugees too, with your experience. Genevieve comes from a very fire-stricken area in North America.
Thank you, Annalise, and thank you, Rosemary, for being so solution-oriented. I just came from Portland, Oregon, and one of the things that struck me was to see so many communities in the complete terror of having fires around them. And I could see this particular level of shock of thinking, oh, how could this reach us? And so what that brings up is that as climate change advances, communities that are in different ecological settings as well as different socioeconomic settings are going to be feeling the effects of climate change on greater levels. And so from your perspective of having seen such a wide range of humanity dealing with the effects of what is going on with the earth, what are some a frame of mind that could help for people who are in like wherever they are, a space where they may feel that they are removed from something like climate change or from the idea of being a refugee, and what perspective could you offer to people to help ground them in and maybe be more prepared as well as more grateful?
One of the things I know for all disasters, and this has been learnt from earthquakes, where 60,000 people died in the earthquakes of Romania, right through to California, where they don't when there's a tremble, and neither do they in Japan, is preparedness beats response. Get prepared, get prepared, get prepared. As a result, I wrote the first chapter in Permaculture on disaster preparation, endurance and recovery. You need to get people to move from being a victim to a survivor with a certain triumph, that we did survive and we can build a better world. So there's something about preparation which has to be different for each disaster. And look, the disasters are going to get, just let's face it, 5 cities in Southeast Asia will go underwater, and 2/3 of the biggest island of Indonesia with 300 million people. Where are they going? And nothing at this stage can stop that except to prepare the people. So the country's being moved, Jakarta's being moved, but that is not enough for the 300 million people. And what is going to happen? And I'm not sure what the answers are. But the fact is, on village, individual, town, city basis, well, here I'll be helping organise almost neighbourhood by neighbourhood disaster preparation courses for fire and probably economic collapse, which is another sort of disaster for most people. So that where I've developed workshops I've used in Solomon Islands with rising seas, here with fire, other areas with flood. And if we go to Bangladesh for rising seas, if we go to green relief for earthquakes and recovery, where Green Relief and Sarah's doing such work, we have, and go back to the Phoenix project in Greece for rising from the ashes. We've got some people who are doing good things, and there are others. And that requires fairly urgent coordination and preparation.
Thank you.
Preparedness is survival. Yeah.
Delvin just asked a question that you pretty much summed up just then, which was great. Erin Young, just in the last few moments, has a question too, and she's got a question. Have you seen refugees meaningfully connect with land and with a sense of place in camps and while on the move? Just a real essence response to that, if you could, Ro.
I don't think I've been able to be as personally involved as I wanted to. But some were, because they'd bring their soil samples and just talk about what they were seeing. And they would tell you with passion what was happening around them with the world, and even a bird.
Right.
Yeah.
And even seeds, Ro, taking seeds to different parts of, of place. And I think that's a mobile way of taking what was from the past to the future, if they had the fortune to be able to do that.
Yes, well, that was a big thing for people. They'd often brought seeds and could use them. With COVID, the big million people camps in Bangladesh, they didn't have enough seed in Bangladesh to give the refugees. So we said, let's fund a seed growing project in the camps So the refugees grow their seed and distribute it. It wouldn't be cereals, but it would be beans and grams and peas and whatever they could get. And get refugees just to get on with growing their own seed and not be dependent on an organisation or the next COVID if there is one.
That's it. Wow, Rose, some powerful insights bringing the world community to our vision in this time. Thank you so very much. Genevieve?
Finally, thank you so much, Rosemary. It's again such an honor to have you here, and this is exactly why we are all in this space today, because we all care very deeply. And the piece that you are bringing about naming this desperation from people who need their basic, we need our body to be able to exist in the world. And when you spoke about that trauma care is secondary to the first physical needs, it reminds me so much of that we as a human species, we can expand and we can philosophize and we can have this amazing space of evolution when we have a planet to live on. And I feel that the work you are doing and the work of everyone who's really in the space is actively working to continue and sustain that. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you to you for organising this and everyone who's doing it. Just to be, I'm just so passionate about it. It's just the most important. Thank you. And these, what we found out from that, and you can look up my website. You can look up, I haven't got a website. You can look up Permaculture Refugees website. You can read this report on every camp, every situation, and we've just produced a booklet called Teaching Refugees in Camps, which we will distribute for people, and the next one will be what refugees do with the information 6 months later. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
All right, wow, that was mind-blowing. So
we did it.
Such intensity coupled with such efficacy and such generosity, and I was so struck by seeing the photo of the refugees when she asked specifically what comes to mind for you, and I could see this diligence and this attention and presence from everyone, and it was so much more of an empowering narrative than people are placed or sometimes given. So that was beautiful as well.
Thank you so much.
Coming up next, we are going to close out this session and we'll move over to the next one. I'm so glad that Rosemary mentioned a few more of her sites where you can find this work at. You can also find her at Blue Mountains Permaculture Institute. And we are going to end this session and we'll see you over in the next one. Just hang tight. There will be a momentary pause. You'll automatically be brought into the new room and we'll see you there.